First of all, I'd like to thank Jane and Jeremy for putting this DDP conference together, and inviting me to speak. I'm going to be talking today about possibly the best-known cancer charity in the United States who has lost its way, and I dedicate this talk to all the people that I know who are dealing with cancer. In particular, there's a young man who's very close to our family who just underwent a cancer operation about 10 days ago. And I'm going to go through basically how my career relates to the American Cancer Society and bring it up to the present time. I was trained as an elementary particle physicist. I received my PhD at Stanford in 1970, but I have always been a very health-conscious person, and I wanted to do something more practical than elementary particle physics. And by a number of unusual circumstances, I put together a proposal. After Stanford, I went to the Lawrence Radiation Lab at Berkeley and was doing elementary particle research, but in the spirit of academic freedom, I was, in my spare time, putting together a proposal that would eventually lead to my career as an epidemiologist. And this letter, which I've shown part of from April of 1973, is regarding an award that I received after putting together a proposal to study cancer among Mormons. And it was awarded because the American Cancer Society at that time had institutional research grants given to various universities around the country for ideas that are relevant to cancer. And I received this award of a little less than $3,000 without any formal training or background in cancer research. And I'm eternally grateful for this reward. And although I'm not a Mormon myself, I have lived that type of a lifestyle. And I assembled facts that at that time, in the middle of the 20th century, the state of Utah, which is dominated by Mormons, had the lowest cancer rate in the United States. And so because of connections with a renowned public health figure in California during the 1960s and the 1970s, named Lester Breslow, who became the dean of the School of Public Health at UCLA during the 1970s, I applied for and received in 1973 a postdoctoral fellowship in cancer research named after a lady who I believe died of cancer at a young age, named Celeste Durant Rogers. And so my $9,000 award in 1973 led to a career that has basically now lasted for the last 50 years in various forms. I was helped by getting some major publicity in the very early years of my research because of a number of coincidences that were connected with President Nixon being in the hospital in Long Beach of phlebitis in 1974. A Washington Post reporter picked up a story from UCLA that was related to my early research, and it wound up on the front page of the Washington Post in November of 1974. This helped me get interest from both the National Cancer Institute and the American Cancer Society for research on the low cancer death rates among Mormons. So basically my hypothesis was the sort of called the healthy lifestyle hypothesis, that the Mormon health code, known as the Word of Wisdom, no tobacco, no alcohol, strong family, education, religious activity. I'm shortening it up just to give the basic essence, is associated with low death rates from cancer and all causes. And I have listed on this slide 3 of my major publications, first one being Cancer Mortality Among Mormons in 1975. Then I did an 8-year follow-up of a cohort that I set up, about 10,000 active Mormons in California, and that was published in 1989. And then my last publication on this was in 2008 with my colleague Lester Breslow on 25-year follow-up of this cohort of active California Mormons. And much of this was made possible with funding at various times during the period of 1973 through 2000 to 1992 from the American Cancer Society. And I'm summarizing some of the key results from my 2008 paper. If you have what I call a sort of an optimum group, which I defined as having 4 lifestyle characteristics at the time they entered this cohort study: never smoking cigarettes, at least 12 years of education, being married, and attending church at least weekly. And then if you present the results in terms of standardized mortality ratio, which is a standard epidemiologic method, and doing this relative to concurrent U.S. white males, I'm showing the results for all causes. These patterns were fairly similar for all cancer as well. And you can see for all ages at entry, the optimum Mormons have a standardized mortality ratio of 0.45. That means they are less than half the rate of the U.S. white males. And then if you add on some other traditional health practices, optimum body mass index, regular physical activity, proper sleep, the ratio drops to 0.40. And then if you just limit it to those 25 to 64 years of age at entry, the ratios are even lower, dropping down as low as 0.32. These are tremendous reductions in both total mortality and total cancer. And that's for the males. The pattern is similar, although not quite as dramatic for females. Again, this is the 4 lifestyle characteristics: never smoked cigarettes, at least 12 years of education, married, and attending church at least weekly. And you can see there the patterns are similar. The optimum Mormons at 0.55, and those that age 25 to 64 at entry, 0.52, and the ratio dropping as low as 0.41. And so another part of my research was to see if these results were specific to Mormons or were more generalizable just based on the 4 health characteristics. So what I did was use a national health interview survey where they did a special questionnaire related to cancer risk. And this was a 1987 survey, and the follow-up period of this cohort was from 1988 through 1997. And I looked at the 4, again, the same 4 lifestyle characteristics: never smoked cigarettes, 12 years of education, at least 12 years, married, and attending church at least weekly. And you can see the results here for males. For the entire cohort, it's 0.9. So in other words, this is also a test to see how representative this group is of the U.S. white male population as a whole, because it is supposed to be representative. 0.9 is fairly good because there's a sort of a health bias that people responding to questionnaires are slightly healthier than the general population. But if you start at 0.90, if you look at those that never smoke cigarettes, it drops to 0.72. But then there's further drops that are substantial. And I've combined the different practices. And if you go to the one that's got all 4 practices for never smoking cigarettes, weekly church attendance, being married, and at least 12 years of education, the ratio drops to 0.47. Again, about half the rate of the general sample as a whole. And then if you look the sample for females, you see that it's following a similar pattern. It starts at 0.83 for the entire cohort, drops to 0.70 for those that never smoked cigarettes, and for the 4 practices, it drops to 0.38. So that's even more than a 50% decline. So this is evidence then that it's not so much the Mormon lifestyle, it's the 4 practices. But the Mormons are a good group to study because of their rigorous record keeping, and they tend to keep these practices for most of their life. And so it's a way that you can study phenomena, and in this case, I have published important results showing that there are death rates that are substantially lower than those that occur just among people that are never smokers. Now, the problem started to come around 1990, and it's very clear because I got a lot of publicity in my 1998 paper, and I was surprised that the American Cancer Society just seemed to lose interest in my research. And even though the results were quite striking. And so now looking back, you know, a 30-some year backwards perspective, I've realized that they decided to focus just on smoking and on exposure to passive smoking or environmental tobacco smoke or secondhand smoke. And so they got on board with the EPA report that came out at the end of 1992. It's called the 1993 EPA report that claims that passive smoking causes 3,000 lung cancer deaths per year. It's the official name of the study is Respiratory Health Effects of Passive Smoking, Indoor Air Quality. And one sentence of the summary is, the report concludes that exposure to environmental tobacco smoke, commonly known as secondhand smoke, is responsible for approximately 3,000 lung cancer deaths each year in non-smoking adults. Well, at the time of this report, this was very, very controversial. There's no, the strength of the evidence is incredibly weak compared to the evidence on active smoking. So this sort of explains what happened in my view, and this is a book that came out in 1999 by a former high official at EPA named Gio Gori and his co-author John Lewick. It's called Passive Smoke, EPA's Betrayal of Science and Policy. And I'll just read a couple sentences from their summary. EPA succumbed to political pressure from the anti-tobacco lobby. Frustration in the campaign against tobacco, whose strategists came to realize that this right could be restricted forcibly only if it could be shown that passive exposure to environmental tobacco smoke represents an involuntary risk to non-smokers. Thus, a major effort in this direction began with a call to arms in the 1979 Surgeon General's Report on Smoking, followed by substantial offers of research funds from agencies under Surgeon General and Public Health Service and from allied interests of the American Cancer Society, the American Lung Association, the American Heart Association, and other advocacy groups. To weigh in on this subject, I published a paper the official date was May 17th, 2003. It's a little over 20 years ago. The study was made possible because of my long involvement with the American Cancer Society. I was able to gain access to their original 1959 American Cancer Prevention Study, the California portion that I've abbreviated as CA-CPS-1. And this cohort was something that had been used to firmly establish the relationship between active smoking and lung cancer and other forms of cancer, and was one of the most renowned cohort studies at that time. When it was started, it was put together by roughly 70,000 American Cancer Society volunteers in 25 states. And this is part of the this is the conclusion that I wrote. The results do not support a causal relationship between environmental tobacco smoke and tobacco-related mortality, although they do not rule out a small effect. The association between exposure to environmental tobacco smoke and coronary heart disease and lung cancer may be considerably weaker than generally believed. The moment this paper came out, I had approximately a third of a century of excellent, high-quality epidemiologic research and scientific research dating back since my 1970 PhD at Stanford. In 1 week, my reputation as an epidemiologist and a scientist was completely ruined by the smears and lies of the American Cancer Society and the anti-tobacco activists. I'm not going to go through that now. That's a story that could take another hour itself. But what I did is summarized what happened during 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006 in a paper that I published in 2007. I came within 1 day of losing my job at UCLA, and I was saved by a courageous professor who had known me for 25 years. This is how dangerous smears are on academia. So this is the paper that I wrote came out October 10th of 2007 in a journal, an obscure epidemiologic journal called Epidemiologic Perspectives and Innovations. It at least allowed the publication of my paper. I couldn't, of course, get it in any major epidemiology journal. This analysis presents a detailed defense of my epidemiologic research in the May 17, 2003 British Medical Journal that found no significant relationship between environmental tobacco smoke and tobacco-related mortality. In order to defend the honesty and scientific integrity of my research, I have identified and addressed in a detailed manner several unethical and erroneous attacks on this research. Finally, I compare many aspects of ETS epidemiology in the U.S. with pseudoscience in the Soviet Union during the period of Trofim Denisovich Lysenko. Overall, this paper is intended to defend a legitimate research against illegitimate criticism by those who have attempted to suppress and discredit it because it does not support their ideological and political agendas. Now, we move forward to the present time to look on the ACS website. They have the claim, secondhand smoke causes cancer. Secondhand smoke causes lung cancer, even in people who've never smoked. Secondhand smoke causes other diseases and death. Exposure to secondhand smoke increases the risk of developing and dying from heart disease. These are completely disputed facts that are incredibly weak, and yet they use the word cause. They also have a political action arm that is called Cancer Action Network. On that website, as part of their smoke-free campaign, they have the statement, and the science clearly shows that secondhand smoke causes cancer, even for those who have never smoked a cigarette. Most interestingly, from my point of view, is the ACS and the ACS Cancer Action Network website contain no mention of the greatly reduced cancer and total death rates among those with healthy lifestyles involving factors in addition to non-smoking, such as education, marriage, and religiosity. I find this appalling, but again, in this world now where you have politically correct factors, something like religion is probably very politically incorrect. In fact, I know it is. So as part of this alliance with the EPA, this is again, my hypothesis and synthesis. The ACS second study, the second cancer prevention study, which started in 1982, called CPS-2, has been used now for roughly 25 years, roughly from the period of 1995, where the first publication there is listed, up to about 2020, especially during the first 15 years. So I listed 4 key publications from 1995 to 2009 that were done to reinforce the notion that this air pollutant, I spoke about this last year in Las Vegas. It's known as fine particulate matter, abbreviated PM2.5. I'm not going to go into that right now. The point is, it's again, an incredibly weak in terms of relative risk factors, but the American Cancer Society allowed this precious database, which was assembled by like 70,000 volunteers. In this one, the second one was done in all 50 states and involved about 1.2 million subjects who are all expecting it to be used for cancer prevention and not other purposes. However, on the ACS website, until it was taken down, I followed this quite closely for many years. I believe this, you can no longer find this link on their website, but they had it there for many years. It's, we conduct actionable cancer research. And then it lists our proudest achievements. First listed is confirmed link between smoking and lung cancer. Obviously, that is an extremely important finding because that's the link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer is probably the strongest link in chronic disease epidemiology that's ever been found. But unbelievably, second, they listed informed air pollution policies. And under that category, they said findings from CPS2 contributed substantially to the scientific evidence associating increasing levels of specific types of air pollution with higher death rates. These studies are cited prominently by the Environmental Protection Agency and World Health Organization. So this obviously is something that I challenged when I first published I published a paper in 2005 using the CPS-1 database showing no relationship in California. And again, took tremendous criticism. And so now, since basically 2005, I've been dealing with American Cancer Society officials, trying to get them to verify or clarify their results on PM 2.5. And I've listed names here. Probably the most egregious is their CEO, who served from 1992 to 2014, John Seffrin. He directly accused me of scientific misconduct for my 2003 paper in the British Medical Journal to the regents of the university. There hasn't been a single error identified in that paper in 20 years. But this guy was extremely powerful and was part of the reason the ACS has gone off track. I found an article that was published in 2010 that was complaining about the fact that this mostly volunteer organization was paying Dr. Seffrin $2.2 million. So that must be really encouraging to the volunteers who are all working freely. And the other names on here are people that I've dealt with pretty much up until 2021. And to show they were not just refusing to cooperate with me, the ACS refused to comply with a 2013 U.S. House Science Committee subpoena for the data that were now being used. These PM 2.5 regulations are extremely costly, and they've had tremendous impact on numerous industries, especially in trucking and manufacturing in the United States. They refused to cooperate with the House Science Committee. They also refused to cooperate with several highly qualified PhD scientists who were just simply requesting to use their supposed collaboration policy, which was posted on their website. But they don't collaborate, I guess, with people who don't agree with their agenda. And so none of these scientists, including myself, were allowed to collaborate with ACS. Now, because of an incredibly wonderful person out there who I can't identify, I can say that she followed my case and was particularly impressed with my 2007 article on Lysenko pseudoscience. This person had an old version of the CPS2 data set dating back now, it's almost 35 years, but it covered the original follow-up from 1982 to 1988. And so I used this database to show that there were errors in the 1995 paper by Pope that started this ball rolling and got the PM 2.5 standard adapted by the EPA. So my conclusion in that paper was no significant relationship between PM 2.5 and total mortality in the CPS2 cohort was found when the best available PM 2.5 data were used. The original 1995 analysis found a positive relationship by selective use of CPS2 and PM 2.5 data. This independent analysis of underlying data raises serious doubts about the PM 2.5 epidemiologic evidence supporting the PM 2.5 National Ambient Air Quality Standard. Now, I gave a talk about my paper in November of 2017. It was at the America First Energy Conference in Houston, Texas, and I provided a link to that talk for anyone that wants to go back. I put in one slide that shows the essence of my findings that show there's an error in what ACS did. And this is the link to my paper. And then for an increase in level of PM 2.5, these are in infinitesimally small amounts, but an increase of 10 micrograms per cubic meter leads to an increase in risk. In the original Pope paper, it was 1.07 down at the bottom of the slide. That means a 7% increase. I basically reproduced that in my analysis using their data in what's called the HEI, or Health Effects Institute reanalysis, and found a 1.08% increase. But when you use, this is their selective use of PM 2.5 data. If you use the best data that I was found, which I call the IPN, or Inhalable Particulate Network data by Hinton, you get a ratio of 1.02, which is not statistically significant. And then amazingly, I found in the 2000 reanalysis that was done mainly by Canadian statisticians, not American epidemiologists, they actually had essentially the same data that I used, the IPN data, but it was not, the results were not presented. They just presented the data on the PM 2.5 levels, but didn't analyze it. And that comes out with a ratio of 1.02 also. So this is where the controversy lies. Am I right or am I wrong? Here's what Pope, the lead author and mastermind of most of this since 1995, and Gapster, who was the head epidemiologist of ACS at the time, wrote in response to my 2017 article. And they say these, that is their multiple studies, have consistently demonstrated that exposure to fine particulate matter air pollution is associated with increased mortality, especially cardiopulmonary and cardiovascular disease mortality. These results underscore the importance of PM 2.5 as a substantial determinant of mortality in the general population. Consequently, these results also suggest substantial health benefits from further reductions in ambient air pollution. The study by Enstrom does not contribute to the larger body of evidence on the health effects of PM 2.5. Nowhere in their response was any evidence that what I had published was wrong. I wasn't disputing the fact that they'd published many papers claiming there's an effect. I wanted them to address whether my analysis agreed with their analysis if you look at the same data. They have not responded. Instead, they just simply, again, promote the notion that more benefits accrue if there's further reductions. We're now at levels, record low levels of this pollutant based on the regulations that were started by EPA in 1997. There's virtually no way they can be lowered any further, and yet this is the kind of response I get from these investigators. And then, of course, they have the right to just say, my research does not contribute. That's it, you know? I'm nobody. Now, I started with, there's a new leadership team at the American Cancer Society, and so I've had a number of letters submitted in 2022 and 2023, and maybe the most important was one that I submitted November 28th of 2022 to their new CEO, who's a biological scientist with a PhD, Karen Knutson. I also submitted it to their chief science officer named William DeHoot, and their senior VP of population scientists, who's actually their head epidemiologist, Alpa Patel, and their data analyst, Ryan Diver, who's been there. Both Patel and Diver have been with EPA with the American Cancer Society for over 20 years. And they're very familiar with this controversy. I followed it up with a February 2023 letter to the board secretary, an attorney in Utah. I felt that possibly because of my research on Mormons in Utah, she might have taken more of an interest in what I was talking about. I provided tremendous links to all the controversy, etc. No response. Then I got this letter from the CO2 Coalition, which I'm a member of, even though that's not their focus is not on air pollution, it's on CO2. But they were generous enough to send a letter just asking the current board chair, Brian Marlowe, to respond to me. And of course, no response. What I've got instead, the only response I've gotten was from, back to the original November letter, I got a December 20th, 2022 response from their chief legal and risk officer, Timothy Phillips, who actually spoke with me for 20 minutes. But after our talk, he came to this conclusion: as a data-driven organization, we value the integrity of the scientific process. We stand behind the data and interpretation of all ACS-authored publications surrounding CPS2 and are unable to identify concerns therein. So this response came from a lawyer, not any scientist at ACS. Now, this is degenerated somewhat because they claim that I'm bothering their scientists. So they hired a high-powered partner at the Los Angeles branch of a nationwide law firm, Holland Knight, to make me cease and desist. So that's the kind of approach they take with people like me. Of course, I haven't obeyed that attorney, and I'm not going to. Now, here's what I consider is bad use of the PM 2.5 death claims that damaged the American Cancer Society. ACS violates its mission statement because scientifically invalid PM 2.5 death claims have no meaningful connection to cancer. Second, ACS violates the scientific method because it refuses to allow full transparency and reproducibility regarding its CPS2 data. ACS violates scientific integrity because ACS dismisses evidence of no PM 2.5 deaths without finding errors in my CPS2 reanalysis. And ACS has politicized CPS2 research by making it possible for EPA regulators and environmental activists to establish the PM 2.5 standard in 1997 and to implement unjustified regulations that I have evidence have hurt Americans, especially in the state of California. Now, next is the some specifics regarding Karen Knutson, who's been the CEO of the American Cancer Society since June 1st of 2021. There's a lot of information about the American Cancer Society on what is known as the Cancer Letter, which is specializes in analyzing cancer issues across the nation. This is from a 2021 Cancer Letter that's dealing with Knutson's vision for the American Cancer Society. American Cancer Society, a 108-year-old charity that, despite having one of the most recognized brands in the U.S., has seen steady declines in public support since 2007. Last year, which at the time was 2020, The pandemic exacerbated the problem that has been driving the charity's decline, bringing public support down to about $560 million, about half of its purse in 2007, without adjusting for inflation. And then a July of 2022 cancer letter on Knutson's lessons learned in her first year about rebuilding the American Cancer Society. She set up a 4-pillar strategy for the American Cancer Society. The first pillar is advocacy, and then patient support and discovery, which includes research. And the last, of course, is development, which is raising more funds. And then she states an overall goal as enhancing cancer equity and health equity. And she's got a whole bunch of stuff in this article about DEI and all these woke things that, in my view, are not the primary focus of an organization that's supposed to be doing cancer research. So what do others think about the American Cancer Society? Well, I found a 2011 American Institute of Philanthropy assessment that gave the American Cancer Society a rating of C. On the current 2023 Charity Watch, which ranks charities, it does not list the American Cancer Society as a top cancer charity. Then, the source that is, I think, most established is called Charity Navigator. It ranks 110 charities funding cancer research. I've listed on this slide 8 of the top charities, and they all get a 4-star rating, and their percentage of compliance with good criteria varies from 100 to 90%. And then, where do we find the American Cancer Society? It's 3-star at 82%, and when you look at the listing, it's tied for 76th out of 110. And it's the lowest of the 12 supersized charities. And to supplement this, amazingly, when I was flying to Tucson yesterday, I found in the Wall Street Journal, I'm holding this up, a full-page ad about one of the top cancer charities in the United States. It was established 30 years ago. It's called the V Foundation in honor of the founder. This is college basketball coach Jim Valvano, who died of cancer at age 47. At the last couple of years of his life, he worked with others to establish this foundation. And this ad says, 100% of your donation goes directly to game-changing research and all-star scientists. There's no mention here that they're giving their CEO $2.2 million a year and spending efforts to support EPA regulations that, in my view, are completely invalid and that have nothing to do with cancer. And so this is further support that they've gone off track, and that these other charities are worth considering. So my conclusions are the ACS former support, what they did 50 years ago, giving it out to people that had good ideas, that's made possible my career. So I'm indebted to them for all that they did for me in the first, say, 20 years of my career. But they now ignore all the findings that I've made about very low cancer rates and healthy lifestyles. And instead, they're doing advocacy involving invalid claims that ETS and PM2.5 cause death, especially lung cancer. And they're violating the scientific method, they're suppressing criticism, and they're a low-ranked cancer charity. And so my conclusion is Regarding cancer charities, the focus should be on all relevant factors that minimize cancer risk, and there should be efforts to further explore this. And because I'm only one person, it's very convenient for them to ignore me. But I have actually, because of this conference and because of my other friendships, I found two wonderful ladies that have their own experience with the American Cancer Society. They've been trying to help. Maybe it's just Enstrom. I'm just an obnoxious guy that they don't want to deal with. So they tried out a couple of these wonderful ladies who really had not been directly involved in this issue. So I would like them to come up now and make a few words, stating what they've done, and this is part of my way of doing science. You try to replicate, you try to take every angle you can. I would like others in this audience to help me as well. But first of all, I will bring up, it's San Jose State University Professor Elizabeth Weiss.
I'll keep this very brief. So I was contacted by the National Association of Scholars regarding attending this conference due to some of the people who are here with National, who also have an affiliation with National Association of Scholars. I took a look at the program and I said, yes, I'd love to attend. And then I took a special interest in Jim's work because of my own interest in health and disease. I'm a physical anthropologist who looks at disease patterns in past populations, but also present populations. One of my books was I think it was published in 2014, called Paleopathology in Perspective, where I look at disease patterns through time. And so one of the interesting things was I was skeptical that secondhand smoke and fine particle matter would have a huge impact on cancer rates, because I thought we are evolved to sit around fires and breathe in smoke. And I teach a class on mummies, and I talk to students about how in the Inuit and the Aleut, they spend most of their time sitting around smoke, and that there are cancer differences in these mummies that I found. Some more females than males because the females were staying up stoking the fires. But it's not nearly as high of a rate as you would expect, because of course we have a system that has evolved to deal with these kind of pollutants. And so Jim and I spoke a couple times, and I decided that I would reach out to some of these people that Jim mentioned. And I sent a very friendly email, basically introducing myself as an anthropologist, giving my background of how I got interested in this, and then basically asking them 3 questions. And I said, I'm happy to talk on the phone, gave them my phone number, or you can respond to these 3 questions. The first question was, is anyone from the American Cancer Society going to be at the conference or on the Zoom, watching it via Zoom? So that was the first question. The second question was, did they have any information that Dr. Enstrom's work was flawed? Is there something that they could point out to me where he had made a mistake? And then the third question was, is there any new data that show either that Dr. Enstrom's research is negated or strengthened, and their research is negated or strengthened? To make a long story short, I received no email back from any of the researchers I tried to reach. I did get a very quick reply from Tim Phillips, the legal branch of the American Cancer Society, basically telling me that I should not contact any of the researchers. And that is where we're at. Okay.
Stay up just a second. Okay, now I'd like to bring up another wonderful lady who used to be a resident of Los Angeles, now lives in Prescott Valley, but she was a former president of a very wonderful organization in Los Angeles known as the American Freedom Alliance. Her name is Michael Greer.
Well, I don't come from this at any kind of scientific background. I come from sort of common sense background. When and I found 3, one in Flagstaff and 2 in Phoenix. I called the one in Flagstaff. There was a voicemail. I left a message. I realized after talking to James that my sister was recently diagnosed with lung cancer. And so in order to get them to reply to me without mentioning James, because I figured they wouldn't, I said that my sister was recently diagnosed with lung cancer and that I've been doing some research and I had some questions for them. They haven't returned my call yet. The 2 in Phoenix, I called one on Dobson Street. It said that I had reached a number for some kind of health service and that I needed to try a different number, so apparently that isn't an office for the Cancer Society anymore. And then I contacted one on Washington Street. I've called it 5 times and every time the line's been busy. So there's our Cancer Society in Arizona. I did some research because of them talking about air pollution causing lung cancer, and had been in China a few years ago, and when we were at the airport, you couldn't tell what was beyond the airport because the air pollution was so thick. The air was, you could see it was gray, and you couldn't see whether there were trees or buildings or what was beyond the airport. The pollution is so bad there that I thought, well, I want to look up what are the lung cancer per 100,000 cases in China as opposed to America, and there's really very little difference, which you would think there would be a great deal of difference. So I left a message for both Knudsen and Battelle saying, once again, since my sister was diagnosed and I've been doing some research, I have some very serious questions I have to ask them about air pollution and particulates in the air. So hopefully they'll call me back, but so far they haven't.
Yeah, we'll open for any questions people have or comments. You can stay if you want for a moment. Let's see if we can.
So I was looking up the history of American Cancer Society while I was sitting over there. Started in 1913 by good-intentioned physicians and some non-physicians. And in 1946, after the World War was over, then they started expanding a little differently. And later on, they get involved with the government, which is EPA. Am I right in saying that government money has muddied their mission statement, and they're not able to be honest? Like your research is honestly presented, but they're not able to give you an honest reply because they're answering to the master in the federal government. Is that right?
Well, I gave my hypothesis that they are basically supporting EPA because EPA has helped in the campaign of anti-smoking, using secondhand smoke, and so forth. I do believe that they're tied together. I don't know how the finances are going, but I believe there is now just much more advocacy and less research by the American Cancer Society. Go ahead.
this may be slightly off topic, but there's a book called Politically Incorrect Guide to Science, and they point out that all cancers have one thing in common, a wrong number of chromosomes. And could you comment on the fact that I see little research done on something like that? If you've got something that's common to all of something, it would seem like that'd be a good thing to look up.
Yeah, I guess I'd rather stay focused on the topic that I'm talking about right now. I can't go into basics on cancer processes themselves, but I appreciate the question.
Ken Hoppola. Mine's slightly off topic as well, but it's on PM 2.5. The World Health Organization has now declaring that PM 2.5 is a major killer, causing unhealthy air, which, as the lady pointed out, you look at yellow dust in China, it's pathetic. And same with Korea and sometimes in Japan. Are you familiar with the bases for making such declarations of PM 2.5 being unhealthy?
Oh, absolutely. This hits right on what I've been working on basically for the last 20 years. I have focused on just the epidemiology in the United States, where I believe I have the strongest case that there's no relationship. I can't say that about other countries for sure, but given the methodology that's used and the weak relationships that are found, I don't believe there's a causal relationship. And knowing a number of the epidemiologists, especially those that come from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health and the Canadian Canadian biostatisticians, there's actually very few epidemiologists involved in this. These people are all extreme activists who do not believe in objective research. So these claims that are made by the World Health Organization and the Health Effects Institute, in my view, are not valid, but I'm only focused on the U.S. evidence.
Well, dose rates do matter. You cited discrepancies of 10 micrograms per cubic meter dose rates. What if it was 100 micrograms per cubic meter? As you can easily have an indoor air pollution situation where people are using wood or dung-fired stoves inside of their houses, as frequently occurs in third world countries. I mean, it's quite true that people who extrapolate those down to lower doses and use a linear no threshold hypothesis will get the wrong answer. But if at high doses, there's absolutely no question that particulate matter causes all kinds of health effects.
Yeah, no, I'm not disputing any evidence, especially evidence outside the United States, especially in situations in Africa and in the high pollution countries of China, India, and so forth. So again, we're talking now a situation in America where the levels are virtually the lowest they are in the world, and yet this is highly relevant because the EPA wants to further lower the standard and make it virtually impossible for various trucking and manufacturing in the United States, in spite of the very weak evidence.
Yeah, when Jim speaks, the microphone's up here. When I speak, it's down there. Jim, it was a pleasure to hear your talk. I'd like to address the last comment. In toxicology, dose is everything. Everything can be poisonous. Everything can be beneficial. And it appears that you need a little bit of air pollution for the benefit. But if you take the maximum level permitted and you look at that for exposure over 80 years, you're going to get less than about a gram of material. As a toxicologist, I know there are a lot of toxic substances. The most toxic I know would be botulism toxin, and that's injected into people in milligram quantities. So over that dose that we have in the air of PM10, the dose that we have in the air of PM10 is so small that if it were botulism toxin, it would have no effect. I think what I'm seeing is that there's a war on our economy. And I think people, I've been on several EPA committees, and I think people that really want us to not be prosperous have taken charge, and they're using regulation as a pawn, because the dose response argument supports Jim entirely.
Thank you. With just one concluding comment, I'd like, if there are others in the audience that would like to help send emails to the American Cancer Society and see if they can get a response, I would really appreciate it, because I think we have an opening to put pressure on the American Cancer Society, since there's 75 other cancer charities that are ranked above it. And one way of getting at people is through the pocketbook, and American Cancer Society is suffering at the moment for good reasons.